what policymakers are interested in is like, what is going to work the best? What does it cost? And can you actually do it?
Welcome to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts. My hope is to share with you not only valuable insights and knowledge from leaders in education, but have fun while doing it and shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Now, more than ever, there's a spotlight being shined on our education system, requiring states to make decisions to help support educators. Schools, teachers, and students need help. Whether in the classroom or as school leaders, educators want to do what they're called to do by helping students reach their goals. But historically, there has been a disconnect between best practice, what's feasible, and what policy dictates. What this means is that policymakers often need to hear what can actually move the needle on student outcomes to help them make more informed decisions. Our two guests today are working to do just that. Connect and build relationships with policymakers, researchers, and those that can help change the system for the better. Abigail Woodworth, VP of Communications at Branching Minds, and Yoni Doron, Branching Minds Chief Strategic Partnership Officer, both have been a part of the company since the beginning and have seen how important it is to help schools and districts not only individually, but at the policy level. Here's our conversation. Well, today on our podcast, we welcome two guests. I think this is the first time I've had two guests together on the podcast. We have Yoni Doron, our Chief Strategic Partnership Officer here at Branching Minds, and Abigail Woodworth, who is our VP of Communications, both here to kind of share a little bit about their journey with Branching Minds and their expertise. So welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's great to
This
be
is
here.
fun.
Yes. So, whoever wants to go first, but I would love to hear, you both know Maya pretty well, and I'll let you share how you know her. But you both joined or have been a part of Branching Minds kind of since the beginning. So share your experience. We'd love to hear how you came aboard.
Well, Yoni has known Maya for longer, so I'll let him start first.
That is true. As Maya shared, I think in a previous episode, Maya and I are first cousins. Our mothers are sisters. So we grew up together. We spent our summers together, saw each other every few weeks or so. My sister is very close to her in age. And so the three of us kind of all spent time together growing up. And so a little over 10 years ago, in 2012, Maya, as she shared, was almost due to have her first child. And I went up to visit her in her apartment in New York City. And we were painting onesies together, getting ready for the new baby. And she shared with me the idea that became Branching Minds. It was still just a very little, a germ of an idea, but it was something that was very exciting. And I knew it was a great idea. And I also knew that Maya was the perfect person, especially as someone who was a classroom teacher at the time. And given her previous experiences leading things and getting people to join in her adventures, that he was the perfect person to start this.
I love that you called it like the little germ of an idea, because it almost is like, it grew with her children, I think she
Yes.
often says. So feels appropriate.
Yeah, that's right. Branching Minds, we didn't have a name for it. And we had initial idea that sort of had the vision for what became Branching Minds. But at the time, we didn't really know too much about RTI or what became MTSS. But we had an idea, or Maya really had this idea of helping teachers to support their students and finding evidence-based learning supports to help them. And that developed over time and happened to fit into this model of multi-tiered system of supports. So
That's great. So did you just kind of like, I'm here for the ride, I'm here whatever you need, kind of like her partner in crime, or was she just like you were her sounding board for her ideas?
initially, she just shared the idea with me, and I'll say this was in 2012 when like the iPhone was still like relatively new, and everybody seemingly had an idea for a new app. Everyone was like, "Oh, want to hear my idea for an app?" And I feel like 90% of the ideas were like really stupid. But so when Maya told me, she's like, "Oh, I have an idea for an edtech company." I'm like, "All right, let's hear it." And I'm like, "Oh, that's actually a really good idea." And so I was like kind of surprised. And at the time, I was working in education policy. I was working for a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the Aspen Institute. And I was working on a program looking at programs, policies, and research to help low-income families, particularly women and children, rise out of poverty, looking at early education, K through 12 education, and post-secondary education. And so I was working in an area of education that was really high up and really kind of far removed from the classroom. And so when Maya had this idea, I said, "This is really exciting. This is something I want to be a part of."
That's really great. I had no idea that that's sort of, because it just your background really fit with what she kind of needed to know of just like, is this possible? Is this something that's needed? And just maybe your view helped her sort of hone in on that. That's really cool. So, Abigail, you also have a history with Maya that precedes the birth of Branching Minds.
Indeed, yeah. So Maya and I met when we were both in college at University of Pennsylvania, and we were fast friends. And while we were college students, we actually formed and ran a nonprofit together, a community education organization in West Philadelphia. And through that experience, like we learned a lot about getting things started and barriers and what it took. But we also learned how much we loved working together. And so when she decided that she was going to, make a go of it and really try to turn this germ of an idea into something that could actually get into schools and actually help teachers, she called me and she said, "I am going to do this and you have to do it with me. I need you." And that was it. And for those of you who know Maya, when she says, "You're going to do this with me," like you're like, "Okay, this is what's going to happen. However I can help, I'll help." And my background, I had been working in universities and in other research organizations, doing a lot of like translation of evidence-based practices and research into the day-to-day work of practitioners, mostly mental health practitioners, and had done some school-based translation. And I just thought it's so important to make sure that like what is captured in academic papers and textbooks is like reaching the hands of the people who are on the front line doing the work. And so the sort of broader mission really spoke to me. And so it was a fun, the first several months is like me and Yoni and Maya in her apartment, like all kind of working on a shared Google Doc simultaneously and fleshing out ideas and trying to just figure out like how do you take this idea and create something that is sustainable and impactful, and who else do we need to help us, because we were very clear like very early on that the three of us could dig up our, roll up our sleeves and do a lot of, groundwork, but that ultimately, like, building a technology platform was outside of all of our scope of knowledge. Now, like 1.5 million kiddos are supported on the Branching Minds platform. It's just, it's what Yoni and I knew from the beginning, that Maya was going to make it happen. And here, 10 years later, it's just really exciting to have been part of that, like, initial ideation, and now to, like, see the massive impact
Mhm.
Branching Minds is having.
Well, I want to kind of go back to the thought of Yoni, your experience sort of with educational policy and how your work maybe, like when you heard Maya's idea based on your work and your understanding of sort of the educational landscape and the needs, how that idea could have met those needs. I think I'm also curious even now as we, look at sort of educational policy, and I know you and Abigail do a lot of work with that. Just with your understanding, like, how do you feel like that is either influencing our work here at Branching Minds, or even how is Branching Minds influencing that educational policy? Like, I guess it can go both ways, but how do you feel like that we can do that?
Yeah. So, it's interesting at the time when Branching Minds started, MTSS was really not something um, that was used frequently by many schools. RTI had become a more common practice in many school districts, and was mentioned in the IDEA legislation in 2004. But it was not something that was mandated in many states yet. It was not something that was being seen used. And over time, as Branching Minds was really developing, the education landscape had really started to shift from an RTI model into more of an MTSS model. Um, and so, with that, many states and the federal government, but particularly at the state level, have started to have more of an impact on what an MTSS model should be, how schools and teachers uh, should be monitoring students, should be referring students for special education, should be providing intervention for students. The coronavirus obviously had a big impact on that. And so, in the last year or so, Branching Minds, because we are working with so many schools and so many districts across the country, helping to improve their MTSS practice, we see the different challenges that schools and districts are facing with that. And so, we are beginning to have more of an active role in advocacy for MTSS, and I think it's a good role for us, because we're really able to work with our school district partners and different school systems around the country, hear what the challenges they are having, and put that together with what other school districts are facing, and then bring that to policymakers and those who can have an impact on.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see how that has shifted. That's kind of been my time in the classroom of just like the understanding of RTI and MTSS and how there is such this need for a better way to help teachers. And I think even that idea of like it's not only about sort of just getting a tool in the hands of teachers, but it's helping support that framework that many schools are adopting or even being mandated to adopt. And so I like how you kind of phrase that of just like that helping advocate for a better way to do that.
And Abigail, if there's anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, I think one of the things that, is a real challenge, and sort of the idea of making best practices actually practicable, is like, there's a lot of information that is contained within, like, studies or academic research about what works and, like, how to help kids to learn better, how to help teachers teach better. And that, having it like in that context of just a research study or a process that is like super cumbersome, right, to actually implement, that is not helpful at the policymaker level, right? Like what policymakers are interested in is like, what is going to work the best? What does it cost? And can you actually do it? Like, is there a solution that can make this actually happen? And I think that we're able to bring those best practices and the research evidence and a solution that makes it actually feasible. And so coming in and I think, like Yoni said, the experience of people who are on the front lines, like doing the work, who are saying like, this is why this works. This is why this doesn't work. This is where we need more support. This is where legislation could be helpful. I think, it's an important role for us to play, because I think we have those varied perspectives and can kind of help to thread the needle, and make sure that like what is happening on the legislative front is actually aligned with like what the science says, what teachers need, what administrators need, and to the ultimate goal of helping more kids to succeed to the best of their ability.
Well, and I would agree with that because I think so often as a classroom teacher, it's easy to feel like these policies are made by people who have no idea what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day level. I mean, we would say those things in meetings of like, do they understand that this is like what the time that it takes to like produce this kind of report or to get this kind of information back to them? And what's it for, right? Like, why am I documenting all this? And so I think that that's a pain point, I think, for many educators is like when you have students in front of you, what is going to be the most helpful thing for you at that time? And do the people who make those decisions see that? And I think to me, that's part of like giving teachers that visibility and respect of their work. It's if that those policies align and really help teachers do what they're supposed to do. So that all weaves together. So is there anything in that is exciting to see as far as educational policy go, like some turning points that we're seeing with policy?
I think I will say that as terrible as COVID has been for the whole country, but for our education system in particular, it has given some states, it's pushed some states to think about new ways of doing things, and so what we are seeing is that some states there's been obviously a lot of educate a lot of funding from the federal government around COVID. But some states are really trying to be leaders in that. Texas is a real leader in this. I think North Carolina, Ohio, a few other states are trying to figure out ways on how can schools optimize their resources and help to do this in a way that aligns well with an MTSS model, where they are documenting what interventions they are providing for students who are struggling to meet certain assessment standards, and to and to make sure that they are documenting how they are receiving support over time. And that fits within an MTSS model. And we think that's a good thing, that states are seeing the need that we can't let schools just be doing this on their own, but we need to be giving the support to the schools and school systems that they need for that.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Abigail?
Yeah, I agree with Yoni. I think like, the impact on the educational system that the pandemic had was really, one of like shining a bright light on the existing structural problems, right? Like, I think the time and distance learning certainly exacerbated things, but it was because those pre-existing infrastructure problems were there, and weren't necessarily being like focused on. And so I think, you know, I think one plus is that, by shining such a bright light on them, I think it created some momentum, to really address them, and where there were chasms, bridge those chasms, and I think that there is also a lot more awareness, at the policymaker level, that there's got to be like an integrated approach, right? That kids have needs, that their academic challenges are tied to their overall whole kid, right? Like needs. So, behavior challenges impact academics, academics impact attendance, attendance impacts, their social emotional learning. Like, it's all connected. And so I think that there's a lot more awareness now that addressing kids' needs in a comprehensive way is what's necessary in order to ensure that they're able to kind of achieve success across all those domains. Because you can't sort of work in silos, and expect, that it's not gonna have an effect, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
across the board. So, connecting those dots, I think, was something that I feel like people have a lot more awareness about the need for it now, and I think, because some of the needs, like the intervention needs of kiddos, have risen so dramatically in the wake of the pandemic, I think there's, a lot more urgency, and necessary urgency, to figure out better strategies to meet those needs.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think that the there has to be a better way. I always think that. I'm like, there has to be a better way to do this. And I think that even that awareness of that educators can't do that alone and they need the support, they need the system in place. Because we felt that prior to prior to the pandemic of like things needed to change. And so I do believe the awareness, and because we're seeing some more of the dramatic numbers coming out of, the recent research findings. So hopefully, we can continue to advocate for those policies to change and support to happen for schools and students ultimately. So, kind of shifting gears here, I kind of want to talk a little bit about, for you both in developing this company and sort of as you've experienced, some of the shifts in education or even just like the awareness of MTSS and understanding of it. How do you feel like not even teachers, but just educators in general, what would be advice or even just a charge to educators feeling that sort of the either the burdens of the education policy, or even if they're in a state maybe that isn't as supported of those things, like what would your encouragement to them be in that time?
I think there was a time, and I think I hope this is much less so now, but where RTI and MTSS specifically were considered a four-letter word by many teachers. It was considered just one more thing to do. I need to document this. I need to do this, and also I think it was considered by many teachers to be just the latest trend in education, the latest buzzword. I come from a family of educators. My mother is a teacher. My mother was a teacher for 25 years, and both my sisters are educators. And I remember my mother coming home talking about the newest buzzword today, and this will last for a year or two, and then there'll be some other buzzword. There's blended learning and personalized learning and this kind of learning and that kind of learning. And I think many teachers for a time felt like, well, MTSS may just be some latest buzzword that will then pass in 2 years, and there'll be some new trend that folks are telling us that we have to do, or that we have to document, or we have to support our children with. And I think as more and more educators begun to learn what MTSS is, they realized MTSS is really just good schooling, right? It's really just good practice of bringing educators together, understanding how to support their students as a whole, as a class, as a small group, as an individual, and and they realize this is something actually to stay. This is not going anywhere. And so, because it's not just a trend, a technology, but it's something that just makes sense to do. And when we have a technology and when we have platforms like Branching Minds that are able to help them to do it easier, where it's not, a piece of paper or in a file that has to be moved to another file and someone else can't see. But when we have a platform that can actually make it a seamless process of my everyday practice as an educator, then it just makes sense to do. And
Mhm.
so, for what I would say for educators who feel frustrated, and I understand that, I hear that all the time of this latest trend, this latest buzzword, is MTSS is here to stay, and we just need to figure out ways of how to make it better, to make it easier for educators, and to make it more seamless. And to make it part of their jobs, and um, part of their everyday practice.
I appreciate that you said that because I think that I have felt that many times where, the longer I was in when I was new and fresh, all of it was like new and sounded great. But like over the years, it became to like, okay, here's another new thing.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's like a lot of times teachers are overwhelmed by it's kind of like new thing fatigue of like a
Mhm.
new, it was one-to-one iPad learning and then it was using an LMS. And then it was, not only the technology is changing rapidly, but so is like new curriculum and new
Curriculum
standards and all
standards.
this stuff. And so I think there is that part of really, it's like MTSS having really good marketing to like really articulate or, communicating, MTSS if it was itself, I know it's just a framework, but if it was itself a company of like really trying to like sell it as this, like actually this is the thing that is the umbrella to all those other things.
Right.
And it's not just, another new thing that you just wait it out and there'll be another. It's just not the same thing with a different name as veteran teachers would often say. So I appreciate that you said that. I feel very validated as a former teacher that feel some validation there. Well, thank you both for talking with me today. I'm sure there's so many other topics that you guys are super knowledgeable about. But as usual, we end our podcast with kind of a fun question because we are fun here at Branching Minds. So you can answer it two ways. You can answer it as from your perspective of your experience as a student or even just here as an adult. But what is your favorite school supply? So you can answer like, what was your favorite school supply as a kid or even now as a adult who maybe buys school supplies?
I know mine totally right off the bat. So, this is my favorite school supply to use when organizing my own children's school supplies, and it is a label maker. I love my label maker. It makes everything so fun. And also, in my experience as a lifelong learner and worker, when I get super overwhelmed by like big tasks, I love like putting stuff in folders and making labels for them and just kind of like getting things organized for me helps me to kind of reframe and figure out a strategy, especially for dealing with complex projects. So my
Mm.
label maker has been like a very therapeutic tool for me as an adult in the professional world, but is also like my favorite way to organize school supplies for my
would
children.
would 10-year-old Abigail really like a label maker? Would she have loved a label maker?
I think so. I think so.
That makes sense. What about you, Yoni?
So I'm not 100% sure whether you would classify this as a school supply, but there was an item that I relied on when I was a student. It was like kind of a necessity for me. And there was an item I had when I was a student. I had a real problem holding a pen or pencil in the right way, and I would always hold it in this kind of weird way that would make my fingers hurt at the end of the day. And so there was this like grip kind of thing that would go onto the pencil, and it would help form your fingers in just the right way. And I really, really needed it to learn how to write and to hold the pencil in the right way so that my fingers didn't hurt, like, like grip at the end of the day. And and so I don't know if you would I'm not an educator myself, so I don't know if you would classify that as like an accommodation, or how you would classify that. But it was a little thing that actually went a really long way for me as a child. And seeing today that Branching Minds recommends, we have a library of a couple thousand evidence-based learning supports and activities and strategies and accommodations and different things that teachers can use that have evidence behind them, and helps teachers to say, oh, my student is struggling with this. Here's something that can help them. And that was one thing that I used every day for a long time, probably too long of a time, that really helped me. So.
Oh, I loved those pencil grips. I remember using them too. It was, about that time when you're learning how to hold the pen, and sometimes it's more natural for kids than, but I loved them. I thought that I always had like cute pink or purple ones.
Yes.
Be like So, well, thank you so much, both of you, just for your insight and sharing part of the Branching Minds story. I love sort of piecing it all together and hearing about the origins. And so, yes, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Larissa. This is great.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to hear all our future episodes. As well, if you're enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and let us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @BranchingMinds.